What if I told you that, somewhere along the forgotten coast of Maine, there stands a lighthouse that hasn't been officially operational for over 60 years? What if I told you that until 1997, someone was still lighting that beacon every single night? And what if I told you that this woman claimed she could hear the ocean calling out the names of people who would vanish within days of her hearing them? This is the story of Eleanor Blackwood, the last keeper of Serpent's Tooth Light, and the 23 years she spent alone on a rocky outcrop, speaking to the sea and listening to its terrible secrets. In 1974, the Coast Guard decommissioned Serpent's Tooth Light Station. The lighthouse, perched on a jagged cluster of rocks 12 miles off the Maine coast, had guided ships safely through treacherous waters for over a century. But modern navigation systems had made it obsolete, or so they thought. Eleanor Blackwood had been the assistant keeper under her father, Silas Blackwood, who died that same year. When officials arrived to collect the equipment and seal the lighthouse, they found Eleanor barricaded inside, claiming legal ownership through a deed dating back to 1868. The paperwork was legitimate, if ancient, and rather than face a costly legal battle over a worthless piece of rock, the government simply left her there. What they didn't expect was that Eleanor would continue operating the lighthouse, as if nothing had changed. Every night at sunset, she would climb the 112 steps to the lamp room and light the massive Fresnel lens. Every morning at dawn, she would extinguish it. For 23 years, ships passing in the night would see that familiar beacon, never knowing it was maintained by a single woman, who the outside world had essentially forgotten. But Eleanor claimed she wasn't alone out there. She insisted the ocean spoke to her, and more disturbing still, she began documenting what she said it told her. In her journals, discovered after her death, Eleanor wrote obsessively about voices that rose from the waves during storms. She described them as neither male nor female, neither young nor old, but carrying the weight of something ancient and patient. According to her entries, these voices would whisper names to her in the dark hours between midnight and dawn. At first, she dismissed these experiences as loneliness playing tricks on her mind, but then she began keeping track of the names she heard, and a horrifying pattern emerged. People with those exact names would disappear within a week of her hearing them called from the sea. The first documented case was in 1970. Eleanor wrote that during a November storm, she heard the name Michael Torino repeated over and over in the wind. She had never heard this name before and assumed it was her imagination. 3 days later, the fishing vessel, Mary Catherine, sent out a distress call before vanishing completely. Among the crew was a 24-year-old fisherman named Michael Torino. This could have been dismissed as coincidence, but Eleanor's journals contain entry after entry following the same pattern. A name whispered by the sea, followed by news of that person's disappearance or death. By 1980, she had documented 47 such incidents. What makes Eleanor's claims even more chilling is that many of these names belonged to people who had no connection to the ocean whatsoever. Sarah Chen, a librarian from Portland who drowned in her bathtub. David Kowalski, a construction worker who fell from scaffolding in Bangor. Rebecca Martinez, a college student who simply vanished from her dormitory, never to be found. Eleanor became convinced that the sea wasn't just predicting these deaths, but somehow causing them, drawing people toward their fate through means she couldn't understand. Her later entries describe the voices becoming more insistent, more numerous, until she claimed she could hear dozens of names every night during storm season. The isolation began to take its toll. Eleanor's handwriting became increasingly erratic, her entries more paranoid and disjointed. She wrote about seeing ships that weren't there, about lights beneath the water that spelled out messages in some incomprehensible language. She claimed that sometimes the voices weren't just naming the suit to die, but calling to her directly, trying to convince her to come down to the water's edge. In 1985, her journal entries revealed that she had stopped maintaining most of the lighthouse except for the beacon itself. She wrote that she couldn't risk leaving the lamp room during storms because that's when the voices were strongest, and she needed to write down every name she heard. Her sense of duty to document these death omens had become an obsession. Local fishermen who occasionally spotted the lighthouse operating began to spread rumors about the crazy woman on Serpent's Tooth Rock. Some claimed they had seen her standing at the gallery rail during storms, screaming back at the ocean. Others swore they had heard two voices calling from the lighthouse at night, Eleanor's and someone else's, though no one else was supposed to be there. The most unsettling testimony comes from Captain Roy Hutchins, who made monthly supply runs to Eleanor until 1991. He described their final encounter in vivid detail. When he arrived that October morning, Eleanor was waiting at the dock, which was unusual since she typically had to be called from the lighthouse. Her hair had gone completely white, though she was only 58 years old, and her eyes had a wild, unfocused quality that made him uncomfortable as he unloaded her supplies. Eleanor grabbed his arm and told him he needed to leave immediately and never come back. When he asked why, she said the sea had been calling his name for 3 nights straight, and she couldn't bear to document another death of someone she knew. Captain Hutchins, unnerved, made the delivery as quickly as possible and left. 2 weeks later, Captain Hutchins suffered a massive heart attack while driving home from the docks and died when his truck veered off the road into Penobscot Bay. Eleanor's final JOURNAL entry, found later, was a single line. Roy Hutchins, October 28, 1991. I tried to warn him. After that, no one dared approach Serpent's Tooth Light. The beacon continued to operate, but Eleanor Blackwood had become a ghost story, a cautionary tale whispered in waterfront bars about what happens when you spend too long listening to the ocean. The end came in February 1990, during one of the worst storms in Maine's recorded history. Coast Guard helicopters conducting rescue operations reported that Serpent's Tooth Light was operating normally at 11 p.m. on February 13th. By dawn, on February 14th, the light was dark. When the storm cleared enough for a rescue team to reach the lighthouse 3 days later, they found Eleanor's body at the base of the tower. The official report stated that she had fallen from the gallery during the storm, but the scene told a more disturbing story. Eleanor's final journal was found open on the lamproom floor, blown by wind that had somehow gotten inside, despite all the windows being closed. The last entry, written in a handwriting so shaky it was barely legible, simply read, "They're calling my name now. They're calling me home." But here's what the official reports didn't mention, what only came to light years later when one of the rescue workers, dying of cancer, decided to share what he had really seen that day. Eleanor's body wasn't just at the base of the lighthouse. It was arranged on the rocks as if she had been carefully placed there, her arms crossed over her chest, her eyes open and staring out at the sea. More disturbing still, she was completely dry despite having allegedly fallen during a raging storm. And the lighthouse itself, the rescue worker described finding something that shouldn't have been possible. In the lamproom, carved into the lens housing with what must have been years of patient work, were hundreds upon hundreds of names, the same names that appeared in Eleanor's journals, plus dozens more. When investigators cross-referenced these additional names with missing persons reports, they found that every single one belonged to someone who had disappeared or died under mysterious circumstances between 1974 and 1997, people from all over New England and the maritime provinces, most with no connection to each other or to the sea. The lighthouse stands empty now, officially abandoned and legally off-limits to visitors. The Coast Guard installed an automated beacon in 1998, but it's solar-powered and much dimmer than Eleanor's nightly ritual. Local mariners claim it's not the same. That ships still occasionally run aground in that area, despite the modern navigation equipment. But perhaps most unsettling of all are the reports that continue to filter in from fishing crews and cargo. Ships passing Serpent's Tooth Light on stormy nights. They describe seeing the old beacon burning bright and strong, operated by a figure silhouetted in the lamproom windows. A figure that appears to be writing frantically in a book, occasionally pausing to lean out into the wind as if listening for something in the howling of the storm. The sea, it seems, still has names to whisper. And somewhere out there, on Serpent's Tooth Rock, Eleanor Blackwood might still be listening, still documenting the ocean's terrible predictions, still keeping the light burning for reasons we may never understand. Whether you believe in Eleanor's supernatural claims or think she was simply a woman driven mad by decades of isolation, one fact remains undeniable: for 23 years, she maintained that lighthouse entirely alone, convinced she was serving some vital purpose that only she could understand. And in her journals, she documented a pattern of death and disappearance that investigators have never been able to explain. The lighthouse keeper's curse, some call it now. The price of listening too long to the secrets the sea keeps hidden beneath its waves. Eleanor Blackwood paid that price, but her vigil continues. And according to those brave enough to sail past Serpent's Tooth Light on the darkest nights, the ocean is still calling out names to anyone willing to listen. The question isn't whether Eleanor's claims were real or the product of madness induced by isolation. The question is, if you were alone on that rock for 23 years, listening to the endless conversation between wind and wave, would you be able to resist the temptation to believe that the sea was speaking directly to you? And if it was, what would you do with the terrible knowledge it chose to share?